I'm really excited to talk about the 7 myths of female nervous system regulation. And I think I drew inspiration of this topic really from the space of in my own obsession of self-care and wellness, doing the ice baths, doing the gua sha, having my matcha, doing EFT, doing hypnosis, doing yoga, doing the somatic shaking. And while all those things are beautiful, it's actually not the depth of what nervous system regulation is. And I think that we've mistakenly almost equated nervous system regulation to being calm and to stacking practices or prescribing people certain practices. If you're anxious, just do this EFT session. I see it all the time on threads or in conversations on social media of people asking, what do I do to heal my nervous system, or what is nervous system regulation work? And the answers always make me cringe a little bit, because it's not like they're entirely incorrect, but they're also missing out a very important subject in this, where it's really not about stacking practices. And that's really myth number 1. I feel like when you first maybe are starting the work, having certain routines and doing all the practices, right? The EFT, the cold plunging, all the things, they are important to have a certain level of containment or behavioral switch. But there also comes a season where we need to let go of the idea that prescribed practices and doing the daily routines is actually what creates I don't even want to say a regulated nervous system, because part of one of the myths that I'm going to speak to in a little while is that nervous system regulation is about being regulated all the time. I think I'm just going to say having a healthy nervous system. I think that's a better destination point, if you will, or languaging here. But having a healthy nervous system isn't about this like rigid swapping out this, or relating to ourselves really from this checklist of optimization. What these practices are really meant to do is they are meant to give us more mindfulness. They're meant to help us create a new baseline or do the parts work necessary to help us create a new identity to relate to ourselves and the world in a different way. But the big intention behind them is actually to create that new baseline and be in our body, not just know our body from a conceptual place. So this is myth number 1. It's not necessarily about doing a bunch of practices. And actually, at a certain point in nervous system regulation work, it's actually more important that you almost step away from doing some of the practices and you take what you've learned from those practices and actually integrate them so you can experience more of your life, experience this baseline from a resource place and a place of self-trust. Myth number 2 is that nervous system regulation is about being calm, when it's actually about having capacity. And again, this is something I see as a quite trendy topic on Instagram with the wellness girlies, or on threads or Twitter, YouTube. This almost like it like kind of reminds me of like pop astrology or like pop psychology. I guess this is kind of fits in the narrative of pop psychology, but I think it's also a little bit deeper than psychology, because the nervous system is really an embodied experience. But I see so many people, especially influencers these days, that maybe just have not got proper education, or listening to therapists that definitely don't have a connection to that somatic experience, which is really important for integration, where they're kind of spewing out this kind of rhetoric or stance that being calm is the goal with nervous system regulation. The problem with this is that if the end destination for you is being calm, you actually have not done any of the work that nervous system regulation really requires for you to have capacity to experience the fullness of life. We've become really obsessed with polyvagal theory, and it's beautiful, love it. However, it's really not about being calm all the time. And a lot of that polyvagal theory was mostly studied on male nervous systems. Again, there are certain reasonings back in the day where that was, more of the vibe, but it is a little bit of an uneducated experience for women. And we can even look at this in the menstrual cycle. We can even look at this in the different ways our hormones fluctuate and kind of impact our mood and our emotions. And there's a sense that if we are only trying to be calm, we're really cutting ourselves off from the full range of our emotions, so that if you ever do have any other emotion coming up, like anger or grief, you're gonna kind of go into this space of bypassing, I guess, yourself inherently out of the way that you actually feel things. Nervous system regulation really is more about creating capacity to be in a healthy relationship with your emotions. If your default, if you are feeling anxiety, is to be like, I need to calm myself down, that's an issue. That's actually not the deeper work. A deeper inquiry and a healthier relationship to your nervous system and to your body would be kind of going into the sensations, not making yourself wrong for experiencing anxiety. Because inherently life is going to have moments where you feel anxious or you feel angry. If you're trying to pacify yourself, you're basically just numbing yourself, but in a different way, and calling it wellness. So myth number 3 is that your nervous system is something to be fixed, or it's broken. Not only is this problematic from a mindset perspective, but over time it creates a really unhealthy relationship with your body, and again goes into that theme of relating to yourself as if you're a project to fix instead of, a body to have a relationship with. The reason why your nervous system or your body has trauma cues are because there was wisdom in those responses. So if you're relating to your body in a way that I need to fix this or this isn't okay, we are creating more and more shame, and nothing is more dysregulating than approaching your self-optimization or your self-development tools from this place of creating more internalized shame or feeding this inner critic. When we are really coming into a relational field with the body and with the soma, right? The soma translates to the living body. So this is why somatics are really beautiful, and I honestly think really vital in order to create a true integration, true wellness. And I know that even terminology creates a little bit of superiority around like what is true wellness and what's not. And there's a completely different conversation to that. I don't necessarily think that there's hierarchy, but there are foundational things that I just don't think necessarily can be argued. This conversation around the relational field for the body is the whole intention behind nervous system regulation, is not to look at ourselves from a space that we're broken and so fragile. That might be true in the moment, but we also have to see the wisdom of why our nervous systems might be reacting to certain stressors or certain environments. And instead of going, that's wrong, that's bad, we really need to come to this place of what is this wisdom? Why am I having this bodily response? And coming from a place from curiosity and compassion. It's going to shift the whole way you relate to your body. And again, going back to this myth number 2 about the destination about being calm, the whole point is to really create this attuned relationship with your body. We can't do that if we're just creating more shame. Myth number 4 is you just need to do more breath work and more meditation rituals. So this kind of goes into number 1 around rituals, but more specifically around actually feeling your emotions. You need to move it. You need to shake it. Emotions are energy in motion. So sometimes the answer isn't always being in stillness. And again, polyvagal theory has really kind of had this obsession around being calm or being in this not parasitic, but this calm more state as like the hierarchy state of what we want to experience. And again, it's about creating full range. So sometimes the answer with the body, and especially why I encourage people to explore somatics, experiencing and embodiment rituals, and sometimes breaking up with their therapist that doesn't offer that, is actually going into experiences where you'll learn to have the resources to attune to what your emotions need in that moment. Sometimes you are going to want to shake. Sometimes you are going to want to cry it out. Sometimes it's even just a subtle noticing of how the sensations of grief are moving through your body, and you don't need to have a big peak release. Myth number 5 is kind of, I feel like, counter to what I just said, but the thing with nervous system regulation, it is so nuanced, and this is why I almost feel like the work is really meant to be done with a proper guide or someone that can hold these spaces of nuance. So number 5 is that nervous system regulation isn't about peak performance breakthroughs. So even though I just said that sometimes the emotion is going to want, a big release, like a cry, like a shake, like screaming into a pillow, sometimes the subtlety is actually what the body needs. And if we just create, what I'm trying to say is if we equate nervous system regulation to the peak performance, where, sometimes we see that on like Instagram or when people are like marketing their retreats, where it's like people are like crying and they're screaming, or we see the embodiment coaches doing all their dances and all of their things. Not to say it's all performative, but sometimes we just don't need that. There's real magic in subtlety, and it's kind of this like un-Instagrammable healing work. It's very subtle. It's noticing how our breath drops, or our posture, or maybe tension in our jaw. It's this subtle noticing, and it's a really important skill to become resourced in, because we're attuning to the body in a way that goes beyond performance into actual deep listening of what your body needs, not what you think it needs to look like because you saw some Instagram coach or some therapist or someone on the internet, showing you what it means to have a breakthrough. Sometimes the breakthrough is subtle, and sometimes that's actually more regulating for your nervous system. Those big breakthroughs can also re-traumatize you if you're not doing it in a way that is grounding. Activating breath work is a really great example of this, and I have my own experience of, I was in San Diego visiting a friend, and I had no idea she wanted to take me to this wellness event, and I had not been prior told that it was a breathwork ceremony, and I kind of am cautious about breathwork facilitators because they often can teach breathwork in this very over-activating way. And I went out of that experience feeling so re-traumatized, and it took me months and months to recover. It's almost like when you go to an ayahuasca ceremony or you take too much shrooms and you're kind of blasting off. This is where titration becomes really important. But I think that sometimes we put this hierarchy of like, well, this is what the breakthrough is, where breakthroughs can actually be really gentle. They can be really loving, and you can experience more joy. It doesn't always need to mean this deep, dark, like shaking and screaming. And oftentimes those can be a bit performative. Not all the time. However, if you've ever been in a place where you're kind of comparing what your journey has looked like to someone else's, I know from my own experience of doing, lots of ayahuasca back in the day, that I never had like a big puking, experience. Mine was always more subtle. And that was just as valuable as the person having maybe a bigger experience if it was authentic to them. And the same applies to nervous system regulation work, the practices that we do, the wellness things that we do. It's really about what does that actually look like and feel like for your body in the most authentic way. Number 6 is that nervous system regulation work is all science-based, and while that is very much true, when we take out the mysticism part of the conversation, this is why I really believe in somatics and mysticism or esoteric teachings alongside each other, because the science is important, obviously. But there's also this real part of, I think just even self-evolution, that if we take the mysticism or the shamanic part or the soul out of it that can't be necessarily explained by science, we're missing a really deep, deep part of how we actually can come into deeper center with ourselves. especially women, you know, when you are bleeding, when you have babies, when you have a womb, there's such a mystical journey that it just inherently about being a woman. And that mysticism, that kind of oracle energy is really a through line when it comes to creating a healthier nervous system with more capacity. And last but not least is that nervous system regulation work is all about the vagus nerve. So obviously the vagus nerve is, you know, a big important part of this work, but especially when you're a woman with a womb, with breasts, and a spine. I mean, all genders have spines, but this work really is also centered in womb work as well. This vagus nerve travels all the way down into our pelvic bowl. So if we're just focusing on nervous system regulation work from this top-up approach, which I think many people do from a mindset perspective, or even when they're doing somatics, they don't actually go deeper into the pelvic bowl. You know, how much the womb can hold trauma, if you have sexual trauma, or if you've had any miscarriages or abortions. There can be this energetic piece to it, and that's why, you know, myth number 6 about taking the mysticism out of this was a subtle nod to this as well. The womb is a really important piece when it comes to actually creating a healthy relationship with your body. It's this power center. It is really this deep channel. So if we're just focusing on nervous system regulation work from this scientifical place that's been handed down, you know, from mostly males that are experts in this field, we're not really attuning to what our feminine bodies need. And when we're not attuning to what our feminine bodies need, that there's this, it always feels like there's a missing gap in my experience. And I've really seen this with a lot of my clients too, where they know the concepts of being embodied. They know the concepts of being a resourced woman or nervous system regulation work. They've read the books, they've listened just to all the things. Maybe they've taken courses, and it's like this conceptual way of relating to their body rather than actually being in their body. And so much of that full embodiment is dropping into pelvic bowl. And I think we don't really think of the pelvic bowl unless it comes to birth or when we are menstruating. If we have this disconnection from this real power center, especially because the vagus nerve does travel down into our pelvic bowl. If there's tension here, we're gonna feel it in the other places that the vagus nerve travels to. If we have, you know, unregulated periods or irregular periods, if we have hormonal fluctuations, all of that plays a big part into the other elements of our body. So those are all the myths that I wanted to share with you guys today. I felt so good to just kind of start experimenting with video, and eventually this is going to become a podcast. If you have any questions about the nervous system or somatics and feminine leadership, let me know. I love supporting women, and if you want more of this content and you're not subscribed already, please do. And I also have a weekly email list that goes out sharing kind of stories and perspectives along this subject as well, so feel free to hop in there. Yeah, I'm so excited that I got to do this today and hang out with you guys. Like I said, if you have anything that you want to share, be in the comments below. This is gonna be my primary space to hang out with for the next while around having more deep, long-form conversations. So make sure to subscribe so you can get all the content.